This Japanese whiskey is supposed to be nice and balanced. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, today I'm looking at a Japanese whiskey that's supposed to be nice and balanced. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now first off, what is this whiskey? This is the Taketsuru pure malt whiskey from the Nikka Distillery, or rather from both of the Nikka Distilleries. So this here is what's called a pure malt because it is all malt whiskey, but it's not from a single distillery, so they can't call it a single malt whiskey. It actually comes from the two Nikka distilleries, the Yoichi Distillery, which is way up north, up there, and the Miyagikyo Distillery, which is down south, around about there or so. And those two whiskies make different styles. So they're in different parts of the country, they've got different climates, and they make different styles of whiskey, with the Yoichi Distillery up north making kind of smoky, more Scotch whiskey, that kind of like really heavy, almost maritime seaside Scotch peated whiskey, and the Miyagikyo whiskey making the lighter, softer, sweeter, kind of fruitier whiskeys, almost a little bit more like an Irish style whiskey where it's a little bit softer, lighter, and generally doesn't have any peat in it. And this whiskey is named after Nikka Taketsuru. So he was the founder of the whiskey kind of business in Japan. So like Shinjiro Tori, the guy behind Suntory whiskey, he kind of funded Nikka Taketsuru to go over to Scotland, learn to make whiskey, and then bring that knowledge back to Japan. When they kind of started working together, though, they had a bit of a falling out, with Taketsuru saying he wanted to make whiskey more like Scottish whiskey, hence why he went way up north and made whiskey in a similar enough climate to Scotland. But Suntory wanted to make the lighter, sweeter whiskies that they thought would be more appropriate to a Japanese palate. Fast forward a few hundred years, or however long it was, and Nikka Taketsuru said, okay, fine, we have to make more kind of lighter, sweeter whiskies, and this is kind of like the recognition of this. This is Nikka Taketsuru's blend, since it's named after him. It even has his signature there. This is a very small bottle, so I won't put this up to camera, but I'll put a big picture of it up there. This is a kind of blended whiskey. Like I said, it's a pure malt whiskey, all malt from the two distilleries, but apparently it leans a little bit more on the Miyagikyo whiskey. A little bit sweeter, a little bit lighter, a little bit fruitier, but with still a good bit of that Yoichi whiskey in there, giving it that kind of peaty character, hoping maybe to introduce Japanese people to a bit of smoke, to a bit of that heavier, denser, deeper notes, hoping maybe to change minds and to change palates. And you might be wondering why this whiskey is in such a small bottle. Well, recently enough, I was in Japan and I visited the Nikka Whisky Distillery in the Miyagikyo region around Sendai, and I bought myself lots of like little small bottles to try out different Japanese whiskies because I couldn't fit all the whiskies I wanted in my carry-on. And I picked up this whiskey here. It was part of a little 3-pack where they had the individual Miyagikyo whiskey, the individual Yoichi, and this here, which is the blend of the two. I'll put a link to the reviews of those other two whiskies down below, which you can check out afterwards. But right now, let's go in for the nose on what should be a nice, well blended whiskey. Cheers, sláinte, or as they would say in Japan, kanpai. Okay, this is quite caramelly up front. It's quite kind of butterscotch, toffee, sweet brown sugar, and I got both of those notes in the original two whiskies, but the Miyagikyo, it's a bit fruitier, a bit red berries. The Yoichi had like orchard fruits, apples, pears, that kind of thing. And here, the leading note is the it is that kind of like almost a bourbon cask influence. Sorry, because I'd never said this here comes in at 43% ABV, and it was aged in bourbon casks and sherry casks like those other two whiskeys. So here, I'm almost getting more of that bourbon cask influence, where I'm getting that kind of sweeter, rounder, yeah, that kind of like bourbon cask, caramel, butterscotch, that kind of note, with a little bit of those apples and pears sitting behind it. As I kind of sitting with it, as I'm going again, I'm getting like vanilla icing sugar, I'm getting a touch of peat smoke, but really I'm getting a nice strong hit of like malted, cooked grains, those kind of notes coming through here. Like it is, yeah, definitely on those kind of more malty, grainy notes coming through, with that bit of fruitiness, but really leading off with that caramel butterscotch note. So I'm gonna go in for the palate and see if it stays as sweet, as nice, and as approachable. Cheers. It's light initially with almost like a kind of a honeyed character. I know in the nose it was butterscotch caramel, that sort of stuff. On the palate, it's almost more natural, like honeyed sweetness, that kind of note. But then you get that hit of smoke. You get a little bit of like a turn where you go, oh, after the sweetness spreads, you get that smoky note. It's a little bit, the Yoichi was quite maritime, quite salty. Here it's not salty, it's just got that kind of herbal, peated malt character with a bit of oak spice, a bit of oak tannins, and like a little bit like cinnamon baking spices there going through. I wasn't getting a huge amount of the sherry influence. There was a little bit of fruitiness, but I'm gonna go in again and see if I can find that fruity sherry influence. Cheers. Second sip round, definitely like the peat smoke builds a little bit. So first sip I got sweetness, then peat. Here second sip, that peat is lingering and it's kind of building, but I'm also getting a little bit of like berry notes, like apples, pears, orchard fruits, and a little bit of that sherry cask influence with some red berries, almost like a red currant, like those kind of small, sharp, kind of almost tart little red berries, like that kind of note. A little bit maybe of like an orange citrus as well, like the orange citrus peel, you know, the oils from the outside where it's quite citrusy, quite heavy, quite rich, that kind of flavor coming through. And again, still, yeah, that building peat smoke with a little bit of cinnamon baking spice as well. But yeah, palate kind of light with a nice amount of flavors, but nothing overpowering. So I'm gonna go into the finish and see if that kind of light palate falls off pretty quickly, which I suspect it will. Cheers. Yeah, so again, third sip there, peat smoke building, becoming a bit richer, becoming a bit heavier, but as soon as you swallow, as soon as you take a breath, it does fall off. Like the honeyed kind of sweetness didn't really translate into like a honeyed mouthfeel where it sticks to your palate and you get that really like long lingering finish. Instead, it does fall off pretty quickly, and instead you get this kind of a little bit of like oak tannins lingering, a little bit of that herbal peated malt lingering, and just generally a kind of a light sweet character, like the toasted roasted grains you'd expect in the malted barley. They're there as like a base level there that's kind of fading off still as I'm talking, as I'm breathing, but those brighter notes like the apples, pears, the citrus, the red berries, they fade very quickly, leaving you with that kind of deeper, darker, peaty oak influence lasting on the longest. Before I give my final thoughts on this whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews like this every Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday. So if you want to see those, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, and leave me a comment in the comment section below and let me know if there's any whiskies you think I should review in future. But now, as my final thoughts on this whiskey, I think it's nice. I think it's actually like they were aiming for a well-balanced whiskey between their two styles of whiskey, and I think they have hit the nail on the head here. Like the little bit of the Yoichi, because I think it is more Miyagikyo than Yoichi, it gives you a nice kind of like a counterpoint. Like the Miyagikyo quite sweet, quite fruity, but the Yoichi gives you this, oh, bit of smoke, bit of backbone, helps it be a little bit rounded out. Now, I will say, I have another pack of these whiskeys, so I will be putting these whiskeys against each other in a video. If you want to see that, make sure you check back next week. But I think this is definitely a contender for the top spot. Either this one or the Miyagikyo. I'll have to put them against each other, but it's a nice little whiskey. I don't think though that it's worth the price you would pay outside of Japan. Like I think it's a nice whiskey. A full-size bottle of this in Japan might set you back the equivalent of like 35, 40 euro, something like that. Outside of Japan, because Japanese whiskey is getting hard to find, it can be a bit expensive. Prices still haven't come back down from their highs of a few years ago. I think it's a bit too expensive outside of Japan. I think it's 100, 110, 120 euro. I think much too expensive. If you can get it in Japan, or you can get it at like a more reasonable price, worth a try. Since I got it at a reasonable price, I'm definitely going to keep on enjoying it, and I will see you next time. Sláinte.